Hello, Algebra Scholars. This is the second half of section 5.1. I'm going to call it FBG, which stands for factoring by grouping. It's our next type of factoring we're going to study. It's normally used when we have 4 terms to factor, not with 3 or 5. And then the way it works, the way we're going to talk about factoring by grouping, is 2 monomial GCFs followed by a binomial GCF. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. Here's our first example. X cubed plus 3x squared plus 7x plus 21. So what we do is called factoring by grouping because we group the first 2 terms and we group the last 2 terms. And what we do is we look for a monomial GCF from the first 2 and we look for a monomial GCF from the last 2. Let's do that and then see what happens. So the monomial GCF from the first 2 terms is x squared, and the factors that are left are x and 3. We look at the last 2 terms, the monomial GCF is positive 7, and the factors that are left are x plus 3. Now, please note that what we got inside each set of parentheses here matches, and that's critical. If the parentheses don't match, you either made a mistake or the problem doesn't factor by grouping. Now my parentheses match, so now we're going to factor out a binomial GCF. This is just like what we did in the previous section. We're going to factor out an x plus 3, and the factor that's left in the first term is x squared, and the factor that's left in the last term is plus 7. And notice that we have factored the problem because we have written it as a product. And here are 2 more examples of factoring by grouping. We'll group the first 2 and we'll group the last 2. The monomial GCF from the first 2 is 4x squared. And the factors that are left are x and negative 5. The monomial GCF from the last 2 terms is positive 3, and the factors that are left are x minus 5. I'm excited because my parentheses match, so now I'll factor out a binomial GCF of x minus 5, and the factors that are left are 4x squared plus 3. And the final example there, this one's just a tiny bit trickier. The monomial GCF on the first 2 terms is easy. It's pretty straightforward, 2x squared. And the factors that are left are x in the first term and negative 6 in the second term. Now here we have to be careful. If the third term is negative, like we see it is here, our monomial GCF will be negative. So the greatest common factor for the last 2 terms is actually negative 1. Now remember, when we factor out a negative 1, the remaining factors all have the opposite signs. So we're left with x minus 6. Notice that the parentheses match, so we take out a binomial GCF, and the factors that are left are 2x squared in the first term and minus 1 in the last term. That's factoring by grouping.